Few know this, but within the walls of the Temple of Jerusalem, a silent technology, perhaps spiritual, perhaps mechanical, guided every step of the priests, every sacrifice, every chant. It was not just a calendar, nor a simple sundial. It was something more, something that organized the sacred times according to an invisible order. This time structure, carefully hidden from common eyes, may have been the invisible soul of the temple. And according to little-discussed reports, it would have been controlled not only by priests, but by a spiritual elite, a discreet society, devoted to mastering what they called divine time. But what does it really mean to control divine time? And what if this control wasn't related to hours in the conventional sense, but to access portals between worlds, moments of direct connection between the human and the eternal? This is the hypothesis that scholars of the Jewish esoteric tradition, mystics, and alternative historians have been exploring for decades. A bold idea indeed. But the traces, although fragmented, seem to point towards a carefully guarded knowledge, a timeline parallel to ours, used only by those who knew how to move between the veils of reality. The key to this mystery may lie in the Hebrew concept of Zman Kodesh, sacred time. For the ancient Israelites, time was not linear. It did not flow like a river. It was cyclical, alive, laden with purpose and meaning. Moments did not simply repeat. They returned with renewed intentions. The Shabbat, the festivals, the rituals of the temple, all were organized not just by dates, but by spiritual frequencies. It's as if time were a symphony, and the temple, its hidden conductor. In this context, the temple was not just a physical place of worship, but a highly complex spiritual machine. Each morning at sunrise, a sacrifice was offered. But it wasn't just any time. It was the exact moment when the light touched a specific part of the structure, marking the beginning of what could be called the divine hour. The same happened at dusk. These markings, according to Talmudic records and speculations based on ancient texts, were known only to a very exclusive caste of initiates. The Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, was accessed only once a year, but what if other areas of the temple had more frequent access at different temporal levels? The oral tradition speaks of sounds that only the priests could hear, of vibrations that occurred at very specific times of the day, and of bells that had no clapper but rang on their own. Signs, possibly, that time in that place followed rules that did not apply to the rest of the world. The practices were accompanied by specific music, ritualistic sounds, and chants at defined intervals. Were these elements merely decorative? Or perhaps were they part of a precise system of spiritual synchronization? Some Kabbalah scholars claim that the sounds emitted in the temple were tuned to cosmic frequencies, and that spiritual time was perceived through the harmony of sound, light, and intention. This is not allegory, it's sacred geometry, applied in real rituals. The most intriguing aspect, however, is that there are indications that this organization of time was not solely for religious purposes. It created an emotional and psychological atmosphere among the people, a collective synchronicity, an altered state of perception. The ancient Hebrews knew when to approach, when to be silent, when to sing, not by instinct, but because an invisible clock, alive and dynamic, regulated their spirituality like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra. Now imagine, who held the knowledge to adjust this clock? Who knew the true sacred times, which went beyond the visible? The priestly tradition was passed down through lineages. Yes, but there are records in apocryphal documents and mystical accounts that there was an even more select caste, a hidden group, possibly linked to the lineage of the hidden tzaddikim, who held the true wisdom about the flows of spiritual time. The Qumran manuscripts, discovered in caves along the shores of the Dead Sea, mention a different calendar, unknown to the common people. A secret time, divided into sacred segments, revealing that there was more than one way to organize spirituality through the days. The question that echoes is, What would happen if someone had full access to this hidden system? Would they be able to influence not only the rituals, but the spiritual consciousness of an entire nation? It is at this point that the narrative begins to depart from the known story and enter the realm of the invisible. Because spiritual time is like the wind, invisible, but real. And like any invisible power, if manipulated by the wrong hands, it can become an instrument of control. The temple then ceases to be just a sacred space and becomes an epicenter of spiritual influence over reality. Finally, it's worth remembering that no artifact called the Jerusalem clock has been formally found, and perhaps it never will be, because it may never have been a physical object. Perhaps it was a frequency, a code, a consciousness silently transmitted among the keepers of time. And if so, the true clock was never lost. It is simply out of reach for those who have forgotten how to listen to time with their heart. Among all the accounts that survived the destruction of the Second Temple, few are as mysterious as the scattered references to a possible hidden codex, a kind of secret manual for spiritual operation. It was not included in the traditional sacred books, nor was it accessible to ordinary scribes. It was a set of instructions transmitted orally or through hidden manuscripts, guiding the exact times, the correct chants, and the use of sacred temporal energies. This codex, according to some mystical rabbis, was the backbone of the temple, invisible but essential. This knowledge was not public, nor institutionalized. It was passed down amongst very specific generations of initiated priests, chosen from childhood, often by criteria unknown even to the members of the priestly lineage themselves. Some accounts suggest that these chosen ones underwent silent spiritual tests, hidden evaluations, until they were recognized as capable of accessing the secrets of sacred time. They were called by different names throughout history, but today we call them the invisible guardians of the temple. The function of these guardians was not only to coordinate the times of the sacrifices or instruct the chants. They maintained the vibrational harmony of the temple as a living organism. They studied the astral cycles, observed the winds, interpreted natural signs, and with this, they adjusted the rituals so that the temple was always in tune with the divine will. According to these traditions, the temple functioned as a mirror of the sky, and the codex was the map to keep this reflection always aligned. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran has provided us with valuable clues. Among the fragments, there were descriptions of extremely precise priestly shifts, many of them diverging from the official calendar used in Jerusalem. These writings reveal that the Essenes followed a completely alternative time count, a solar calendar of 364 days, divided into cycles of 91 days. Why such precision? Was it just for discipline, or was there something deeper? For some scholars, this calendar was part of the original codex, the one that the guardians preserved in secret, far from the corrupt influence of Jerusalem's religious authorities. The temple, as a structure, was not static. It was a body. The spaces, the corridors, the altars, the instruments, all were arranged based on numbers, frequencies, and cosmic orientations. There are indications that some of these elements were connected to specific points in the sky, creating an energy bridge between the visible and the invisible. In this sense, the Codex was not a common book. It was more akin to a spiritual blueprint of the temple, a manual for activating the divine on earth. It's important to understand that this knowledge could not be openly recorded. In times of oppression and political conflicts, keeping secrets was a matter of survival. Just as medieval alchemists used metaphors to hide their teachings, the guardians of time disguised their wisdom in chants, metaphors, and genealogies. They encoded everything: schedules, instruments, specific days of the month. Every detail mattered, and every flaw in execution could disrupt the sacred flow of time. What few realize is that this control of spiritual times was also a subtle form of governance. Those who knew the correct times controlled the exact moment when the nation connected with the divine. Imagine having the power to open the heavens or to close access to the divine presence simply by knowing the true sacred instant. This is the kind of power that is not announced, that does not appear in public records. It's a silent power, and therefore, absolute. The practices of this secret lineage did not stop at the temple. According to certain currents of the mystical Jewish tradition, these guardians continued to exist even after the destruction of the temple. They became anonymous sacred ones, hidden sages who kept the cycle of spiritual time functioning, even away from physical structures. They adapted the rituals to exile, created alternative patterns, and silently influenced generations of spiritual leaders. It is no coincidence that in certain passages of the Talmud, we find mysterious phrases such as, "Those who know the time do not speak of it," or even, "The true time is not counted in clocks, but in acts of alignment." These phrases, generally ignored or interpreted as poetry, could be traces of a practical and deeply transformative knowledge. Other lesser-known fragments speak of instruments now extinct, devices that supposedly helped the priests measure the flow of sacred time. Some mention copper plates that vibrated at certain times of the day. Others speak of jars that emitted high-pitched sounds when the sun reached a certain point. None of these relics have been found, but the texts are consistent enough to raise a serious hypothesis. The temple did not just use a calendar. It measured time with sensitivity, sound, and intention. Reflecting on this, an inevitable question arises. Do descendants of these guardians still exist? Could it be that the codex, or at least parts of it, has survived in some hidden tradition, some mystical circle, or even in unknown manuscripts kept away from the world's eyes? If so, perhaps the sacred time is still being guided, even if we don't know it. And if it's true that spiritual times continue to be controlled, even in silence, then the clock of Jerusalem is not a memory of the past. It's a living pulse that crosses the centuries, just waiting for those who have learned to listen again. There is a time within the spiritual tradition of the temple that has always been shrouded in a veil of reverence and mystery, the ninth hour. Mentioned in the scriptures, especially in the narratives of the New Testament, it marks a unique moment, the instant of the evening sacrifice, the pinnacle of connection between heaven and earth before nightfall. At 3 p.m. on the solar calendar, the temple ceased part of its visible activity and turned with almost mystical intensity towards ritual introspection. But why this specific moment? What made 3 p.m. a sacred gateway? In various Jewish esoteric traditions, the ninth hour was referred to as the hour of the veil. This was a threshold period in which the flow of spiritual energy underwent profound changes. It was not merely the end of a daily cycle. It was the moment when, according to the ancients, the portals between worlds became thinner. This perception was not merely symbolic. It was anchored in millennia-old practices, accompanied by movements of light, specific chants, and carefully chosen instruments. The temple, at this instant, transformed into a sort of translucent mirror between the physical world and the eternal. This ritual did not occur by chance. According to Talmudic documents and speculations based on Essene writings, there was a precise alignment between sunlight and certain points of the altar. When the light touched a specific stone or column, the priest knew it was time to start the ritual of the ninth hour. But the most intriguing is that only a very limited number of people knew how to identify this exact moment. It was necessary to observe not only the sun, but the sound of the wind, the movement of shadows, and even the behavior of birds in the sky. This accuracy led many scholars to believe that there was a non-conventional clock operating within the temple. Not a mechanical clock, but a set of natural and spiritual signals that indicated the divine now. This was what some mystics referred to as Kavana Zman, the time of intention, a concept that pointed to the idea that when human heart's intention aligns with the time of heaven, the sacred manifests in its fullness. The ninth hour, then, was more than a chronological mark. It was a frequency, a unique spiritual vibration. The Christian tradition also recognized this power. It was precisely at the 9th hour that, according to the Gospels, Jesus would have expired on the cross. A seemingly historical detail, but one that carries deep symbolic layers. The Messiah dies at the very same moment that, in the temple, the lamb was being sacrificed. The synchronicity between these events suggests that this hour held a sacred code shared by different spiritual lineages. It was indeed a convergence between human time and cosmic time. The temple had corridors that echoed differently during the 9th hour. There are reports that the sound of the harp subtly changed, as if the architecture itself amplified certain notes and muffled others. This created a specific atmosphere of introspection and lightness. It was at this moment that some priests made silent prayers, facing the interior of the temple, away from prying eyes, as if they were waiting for a response that came from beyond. This practice, known as devakut, the union with the divine, occurred with greater depth exactly at this moment. The Kabbalah describes the 9th hour as a window, a gap in the rigidity of chronological time where the eternal insinuates itself. The Zohar says that during this period, the noon angel folds its wings and gives way to the evening angel, the one who leads weary souls to rest. This is not just mystical poetry, but spiritual codes indicating a transition of collective vibrational state. At this moment, the entire community was affected, even without knowing. It's possible that the spiritual clock of the temple was programmed to converge energies in a way to channel this moment as the peak of offering and surrender. The sacrifice at this time was not just physical, it was emotional, it was symbolic. It represented the end of human effort and total surrender to the mystery. According to more hidden traditions, this was the moment when time stopped for those who knew how to feel it. Many accounts speak of trances, visions, and sensations of eternity, experienced by those who allowed themselves to completely quiet down at 3 p.m. Archaeology has not yet found tools capable of confirming exactly how the temple measured this hour. But there are speculations about the use of specific stones that reacted to light, or acoustic instruments that echoed uniquely at this moment. Some suggest that small bells hanging from high points would spontaneously vibrate when the energy of the temple changed phase. Would these vibrations be the signature of the 9th hour? Could they be sounds of the spirit crossing through time? The collective synchronization with this moment was undoubtedly part of the temple's power. Everyone knew that something changed at this time, even if they didn't exactly understand what. It was an invisible call, an invitation to return to the sacred, to abandon tasks and acknowledge the unseen. For the people, it might have just been a practice. For the timekeepers, it was a moment of extreme delicacy, where the heavens opened and reality was redrawn. From a spiritual perspective, this time teaches us about surrender, about trusting that there are moments when doing must cease for being to emerge. The 9th hour was not an end, it was an opening, a pause amidst the rush of the world, a reminder that there is a time beyond time, waiting to be accessed with silence and reverence. And perhaps in our days, when we look at the clock and see it nearing 3 p.m., we might ask ourselves, are we in sync with this internal time? Or are we rushing too much to realize that, at that very instant, the invisible temple within us is whispering, now? Long before any temple was built, even before the Ark of the Covenant, there was a pattern, a secret pulse in time that guided the steps of the first patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob not only obeyed the divine voice, they walked according to a rhythm that seems to have been mysteriously encoded in their spiritual experiences. What many fail to realize is that these encounters, visions, and spiritual tests that marked their lives always occurred at specific moments when ordinary time seemed to be suspended and the eternal invaded the earth. Abraham, for example, is called to leave his land at the break of day, when darkness gives way to light. The same happens when he sees the 3 angels arriving in the heat of the day, The text says, "This is the time when sunlight is intense, clear, but also spiritually active." These markers are not merely literary. They indicate that there was a keen perception of when the divine time opened up for special manifestations. Abraham builds altars wherever he goes, always after experiences that occur at very specific moments. He does not react randomly. He acts within a flow that seems to have already been revealed to him. Isaac's connection with time is also impressive. He is described as someone who went out to the field in the evening to meditate. Tradition calls this mincha, the afternoon prayer, and it is precisely at this moment that he sees Rebekah coming towards him. It's not a coincidence. The 9th hour, already discussed, appears here naturally in Isaac's routine. He doesn't control time, but he is synchronized with it. His gestures are aligned with a frequency that seems to open spiritual doors and meaningful encounters. Jacob, in turn, lives perhaps the most symbolic of all temporal experiences, his dream with the ladder connecting heaven and earth. He sleeps in a place where the sun had set and wakes up saying, "Indeed, the eternal is in this place, and I did not know." The night transforms into a gateway to the invisible, but it is curious that, at that point in the story, Jacob uses a stone as a pillow and erects an altar there, marking the place as sacred. He is not merely recalling an event. He is crystallizing in space and time a point of access to the eternal. Moses takes this connection with divine time to a new level. His 40 days and 40 nights on Sinai follow a numerical cycle that repeats in other spiritual experiences. The flood, the time of purification, Elijah's fast. The number 40 here represents a spiritual gestation, but what few notice is that these periods are meticulously counted. Divine time demands precision. Moses descends from Sinai exactly at the moment the people stray. Coincidence? Or synchronicity between the time of revelation and the time of trial? The Exodus itself follows a cycle of 7 weeks, culminating in Pentecost, or Shavuot, the day of the Torah's delivery. A day marked in advance, a temporal promise. This shows that time, in Hebrew spirituality, is not improvised. It is foreseen, awaited, revered. Each celebration, each divine appearance, each movement in the desert happens within a flow that seems to follow an invisible logic, a silent but powerful divine clock. The construction of the tabernacle, the precursor to the temple, adheres to this same principle. Every detail, every rod, every color, every object was made based on specific instructions and at specific times. God told Moses when to start, when to stop, when to anoint, and the priests had exact schedules for burning incense, changing the showbread, lighting the lamps. Time, in this case, was not merely organizing, it was sanctifying. And there was the manna. This mysterious food that fell from the sky followed a cycle that did not allow accumulation, but demanded daily discipline. It disappeared with the sun and doubled on the eve of the Sabbath. It was a marker of trust in divine timing. The people could not control the pace, they had to surrender to it. In practice, the manna was a kind of edible spiritual clock, teaching the people to trust daily in the rhythm of the sacred. The larger cycles were also part of this ancient clock. The Sabbath, which repeats every 7 days. The 7 years of land rest. The Jubilee, every 49 years. Time was a spiral of return and renewal. Nothing was simply repetition. Each cycle came with a new load of meaning, a new opportunity for elevation. This formed a distinct temporal awareness, where the past and the future were not separated, but intertwined in a sacred and continuous present. The Torah itself is not just a set of laws. It is a tuning instrument for this sacred time. Its narratives, laws, and genealogies have rhythm. The verses have meter. The words have numbering and hidden meaning. Spiritual time, therefore, was not just lived. It was read, interpreted, contemplated. And the patriarchs were the first to decipher this code without possessing a temple, without needing a physical building. The temple was within them. The prophets inherited this invisible clock. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all spoke in prophetic times. At dusk, in the middle of the night, on the Lord's day. Each prophecy came with a timestamp, a warning that Earth's time was falling out of divine rhythm. They were the living clocks, human markers of the world's disharmony with heaven. They called the people to return not only to repentance, but to synchrony. This legacy shows that the clock of Jerusalem was not invented with stones or gears. It was revealed slowly to the patriarchs, like a secret beat that only the attuned hearts could hear. And perhaps when we look at our own life with spiritual eyes, we realize that there is something within us that also pulses at this rhythm, that we are heirs to this divine time, even in a world that insists on running out of sync. On the arid shores of the Dead Sea, far from the hustle and bustle of Jerusalem and the authority of the temple, lived a community shrouded in silence, meditation, and discipline, the Essenes. Considered eccentric by some, fanatical by others, they were in fact guardians of hidden knowledge, particularly about time. While the world followed a calendar mixed with Babylonian and Roman traditions, the Essenes maintained an alternative system, meticulously calculated, which was not just a calendar, but a spiritual language. For them, time was not a line. It was a divine cycle, a sacred circuit that needed to be respected and lived in purity. Unlike the Pharisees and Sadducees, who were divided between legalism and ritualism, the Essenes believed that sacred time was deeply connected to the state of the soul. Living in sin or impurity was the same as living outside of time. And according to their teachings, being outside of divine time was being separated from God. Thus was born the concept of the invisible order of time, a group of initiates within the community who acted as guardians of the sacred flow. The Enoch calendar, one of the most preserved documents among the Dead Sea Scrolls, reveals the basis of this secret count. It describes a year with 364 days, exactly divided into 52 weeks, with cycles of 91 days, perfectly symmetrical. For them, this was the original calendar, revealed by the angels, and deviated by men after the exile from Babylon. They believed that the temple had been corrupted not only in ethics, but in time. The priests no longer celebrated rituals on the correct days. The sacred time was being profaned, and for that reason, they isolated themselves to keep the flame of synchrony with the sky alive. The timing of the Essene rituals was calculated with astronomical precision. The moon's births, the solstices, the equinoxes, everything was observed and recorded. They had sky observation platforms, marks on stones that indicated the change of seasons, and records that made the temple priests seem like amateurs in comparison. But there was something even more impressive: the silence. Most of the rituals took place in total absence of speech. Only the sound of breathing, of footsteps in the sand, of distant birds. They believed that true time reveals itself in the space between sounds, in the pause, in the invisible. It was this reverence for the invisible that defined the invisible order of time, a group of initiates within the Essenes who had access to rituals and texts that not even the other members knew about. These guardians practiced fasting on specific days, recited chants at calculated hours, and, according to some fragments, performed ceremonies in sealed caves to keep the sacred vibration out of the world's reach. They believed that each hour of the day possessed a specific energy, connected to an angel or spiritual sphere, and that by aligning with these energies, a human being could literally alter their consciousness. Time for them was also a tool of separation between the pure and the impure. Those who woke up out of time, ate outside the cycle, or prayed without alignment, were out of sync. They were seen as spiritually disorganized. Purification then was not just moral, it was rhythmic. It involved adjusting the body and mind to the sacred time. There were schedules for baths, readings, and even for total silence. Discipline was not authoritarian, it was therapeutic. They saw time as a medicine that healed the soul by aligning it with the cycles of the divine. The idea of a parallel timeline was clear in their texts. They believed that most people lived in a corrupted, deviated, illusory time. The real time, the time that vibrated in tune with creation, was only accessible to the pure of heart, those who followed the sacred order revealed by Enoch and confirmed by the angels. Thus, while the world progressed in wars, empires, and politics, the Essenes lived in an alternative temporal bubble, an invisible Eden that existed within time. Another striking element is that many of them were waiting not just for a Messiah, but for a chronocratic Messiah, a restorer of time. The expected figure would not only liberate Israel, but would also return the world to the true rhythm of the Creator. This Messiah would bring the correct count of years, restore the lost cycles, and reopen the closed portals of sacred time. His mission was both spiritual and temporal, and for many of the Essenes, this time was near. The influence of the Essenes extended beyond their community. Some scholars suggest that their ideas directly impacted early Christianity, especially in the Gospels that cite the hours with unusual precision. Terms such as the third hour, the sixth hour, and the ninth hour frequently appear in Christian texts, echoes of a tradition of synchronicity that dates back to Qumran. And not only that, practices of prayer at specific times, scheduled fasts, and the expectation of a cosmic return of the Messiah are direct inheritances from this silent order. Even after the destruction of their community by Roman forces, it is believed that part of the group secretly spread throughout the region, carrying with them fragments of the calendar, codices, and practices. They became wanderers of time, nameless guardians, embedded among the people, subtly teaching the art of sacred listening. Their practices diluted into mystical orders, monastic traditions, and even esoteric movements that, centuries later, still speak of internal time, sacred silence, and hidden cycles. This is perhaps the greatest legacy of the Essenes, proving that time can be experienced in a different way, that it's possible to inhabit an invisible, pure, restorative rhythm, even amidst the chaos of the world. And perhaps just like them, you might start to hear the whispers of sacred time, in the pauses of the day, in moments of silence, in the hour that seems to belong not to the clock, but to the spirit. The name of Herod the Great still echoes through the invisible corridors of history with ambiguity and distrust. Known for his monumental works, alliances with Rome, and Iron Hand, he was also responsible for the reconstruction and expansion of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, a task that, at first glance, seemed to be a demonstration of devotion, but which, for many scholars and mystics, concealed much deeper intentions: the control of sacred time. Herod was not a man of faith like the ancient priests. He was a strategist, and he knew that whoever controls the temple controls the people. But there was something even subtler. Whoever controls the temple's time controls the spirit of the nation. Therefore, his reform was not just structural, it was a quiet reshaping of how time was lived, perceived, and ritualized in Jerusalem. What many see as restoration, others perceive as spiritual engineering disguised as sacred architecture. The original temple, according to descriptions prior to the renovation, had a structure aligned with cosmic cycles, rituals based on an organic time, synchronous with creation. The Herodian renovation, despite its grandeur, may have disrupted this synchrony. The changes in positioning, height, and internal proportions were not mere aesthetic whims. They may have broken alignment lines with the solstice, cardinal points, and even the sounds that propagated at certain times of the day. With this, the temple's time began to obey man, and no longer the sky. In expanding the temple, Herod also needed to organize the priestly shifts and restructure the calendar of religious practices. New conflicts arose between the priestly groups and the Essenes, the latter accusing Jerusalem of having deviated from the original time, The Qumran records denounce this rupture. The feast days were out of place, rituals occurring at improper times. This was not just a calculation error. It was, in the view of the initiates, a violation of the harmony between earth and heaven. But there is a question that few dare to ask. What if this was not a mistake, but an intentional choice? What if the new temple was designed not to align with the cosmos, but to align the people with the rhythm of Rome? The Roman elite valued order, predictability, centralization of power. Time began to be counted in a political, useful, pragmatic way. The bells of the temples and the trumpets of the altars ceased to be messages for the spirit and became markers of collective obedience. The architecture of the Herodian temple also favored acoustic manipulation. Recent studies indicate that the corridors and courtyards could direct or muffle sounds as needed. Imagine an environment where only certain words are heard clearly at specific points, an engineering that influences even what people hear and when they hear it. This suggests that the temple was also a sensory machine, a center of spiritual suggestion, and whoever designed this machine certainly thought more about control than worship. In spite of all this, not all secrets were lost. Some elements of the original synchrony persisted. There are accounts of priests who refused to abandon the old calendar and who performed parallel rituals in more discreet locations. They believed that, even with the physical structure compromised, the sacred clock could continue to pulse, as long as there was a heart aligned with the truth. It was a form of invisible resistance, keeping the eternal time alive amidst temporal domination. The influence of Greco-Roman astrology also infiltrated this period. With it, new interpretations of time, pagan symbols, and foreign counting methods came. The priestly elite, pressured and divided, began to merge beliefs. Temporal purity began to unravel. The temple, then, transformed into a stage of contradictions. On the outside, magnificent. On the inside, spiritually out of sync. For the mystics, this discrepancy was the real reason for the fall, not a simple Roman invasion, but the collapse of sacred time. The Levites, in charge of the music and chants, were deeply affected by this. Previously, their melodies marked the sacred hours with almost mystical precision. But with the new structure, the sounds behaved differently. The echo changed, the intensity varied, and the very emotion generated by the notes seemed altered. The sacred music had lost its accuracy. And without music tuned to divine time, the temple was merely stone and gold. There are those who say that Jerusalem's own clock was hidden or deactivated during this renovation, perhaps an object, perhaps a system of practices, or, as the more esoteric suggest, an activation key of spiritual time was sealed so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. If this is true, the Herodian reconstruction did not destroy sacred time. It merely silenced it, waiting for someone one day to awaken it again. The question that remains is, was the temple rebuilt by Herod a gift of faith or a trap of spiritual domination? Could he have erased the last visible signs of ancient synchronicity with the divine? Or ironically, could he have left hidden clues in his own architecture, waiting for prepared eyes to decipher the codes? Perhaps the answer lies not in the stones, but in time. In the time that we feel, but do not see. In the time that pulses within us, and that, when silenced by power structures, remains alive in those who still know how to listen. The year was 70 AD. The Roman legions, under the command of General Titus, besieged Jerusalem with fury and precision. But what was lost in that siege was not just a building or a city. It was the sacred heartbeat of a people. The destruction of the Second Temple represented more than just a physical collapse. It marked the breaking of an invisible clock, a drastic disconnection between earth and heaven. The sacred time, which previously guided every gesture, every prayer, every cycle of the soul, seemed to have been interrupted. The synchrony was gone, and with it came a profound spiritual emptiness. For the Jews of that time, the temple was not just a place of sacrifice. It was the very axis of time. Within it, the everyday met the eternal. Every morning upon hearing the sound of the Levitical instruments, people knew the day was beginning, not because the sun was rising, but because the temple was breathing. When the altar gushed its first sacred aroma, it was as if the world was starting anew. This spiritual precision disappeared the moment the Roman fire swallowed the last trace of the structure. The clock stopped, and no one knew how to restart it. The psychological impact was overwhelming. The people entered a mourning that went beyond the material. They were not just mourning the loss of a place, they were mourning the loss of spiritual guidance. Without the temple, there was no official time for sacrifice. Without sacrifice, there was no more communal atonement. Without atonement, guilt lingered, and even worse, time had become confused. The holidays continued to be celebrated, yes, but something was out of place. The calendar moved on, but the soul of time had been torn apart. The natural reaction was internal exile. The rabbis, realizing that the physical temple would not return anytime soon, began to rebuild time from within. They created prayers to replace the sacrifices. They organized a new rhythm of daily prayers. Each morning, afternoon, and evening began to have specific texts, teaching the people that, even far from the altar, it was possible to maintain sacred time through spiritual discipline. It was the beginning of the internalization of time, the birth of prayer time as a substitute for ritual time. But this movement was not unanimous. Among the wise, there were heated discussions. Had the sacred time ceased? Or could it still be accessed in some way? Some said that the Shekinah, the divine presence, had departed. Others that it now hid among the righteous, like a flame secretly lit. Thus, the idea emerged that the true markers of divine time were now people, rare souls, who carried within them the pulse of the lost temple. Meanwhile, the diaspora expanded. The Jews spread out across the world, each one carrying fragments of the temple with them, not in stones, but in practices, memories, and verses. The synagogue became the new center. And there, even in foreign lands, each community tried to maintain the sacred rhythm. But something had changed. Time was no longer collectively felt as before. The spiritual synchrony of the people was becoming multiple, fragmented, subjective. The temple had been a common compass. Without it, everyone needed to learn to listen to their own internal clock. The trauma of spiritual desynchronization echoed through generations. The Psalms began to be recited with a new weight. The old songs sounded like pleas for an impossible return. And in this scenario of absence, a new path began to emerge: mysticism. Kabbalah flourished as an attempt to restore, through inner ways, what was lost in the external world. It taught that sacred time still existed, but was now hidden in deeper layers of reality and of the human being. In the mystical schools, the idea emerged that the temple rituals were merely symbols of higher realities, that the times of sacrifice were reflections of spiritual portals open at certain moments of the day, and that these portals still opened. But now, spiritual sensitivity was required to perceive them. The temple had been destroyed, but the temple's time could be accessed by those who knew how to tune their souls with the heavens. Even so, the people missed it. They longed for the evening bell, the scent of incense, the certainty that every hour something invisible was organizing itself in perfect harmony. This absence gave rise to lamentations, midnight prayers, to the Tikkun Shatzo, a mystical rite where the absence of the temple is mourned, but also its spiritual reconstruction is prepared. It was a time of intertwined hope and pain, a suspended time waiting to be filled again with light. Among the mystics, a new belief also emerged, that the temple was not destroyed, but translocated to an invisible dimension, where it continues to operate in secret. This profound and symbolic view held that the true rituals continue to take place in higher realms, and that sensitive souls could, in an elevated state of consciousness, participate in these rituals as visitors to a heavenly Jerusalem. It was the idea of the New Jerusalem, not as a future city but as a parallel reality. This mysterious theology taught that sacred time is not lost, it is merely asleep within us, and that every act of kindness, every prayer made with genuine intention, every moment of profound silence, reactivates a fragment of that ancient clock. Thus, even without an altar, even without sacrifice, sacred time began to pulse again, this time in the invisible. And perhaps this is the most impactful lesson from this destruction, that even when everything crumbles in the outer world, the spirit's time doesn't have to die. It just changes shape. And the temple, if ever rebuilt, will not be made only of stones. It will be made of human beings aligned with the eternal rhythm that pulses beyond time. For centuries, men have looked to the sky for signs, to the temple for order, and to the priests for direction. But when all of this disappeared, when the temple turned to ruin, the rituals ceased, and the prophetic voice silenced, something subtle began to awaken, an almost forgotten perception, an ancient spark. The true temple was never outside, and along with this revelation, a new consciousness began to emerge. The sacred clock still pulsed, now within one's own heart. This resurrection of inner time did not occur abruptly nor noisily. It emerged in the intimacy of the seekers, in the silences of the night, in the natural cycles of life. It began with the psalms recited in exile, the prayers murmured before dawn, the fasts aligned with the rising of the moon. The soul, when feeling lost, was forced to listen to what it previously ignored, its own internal rhythm, and what it discovered was surprising. Even without bells, trumpets, or incense, the sacred still responded, as if it had always been there. Mystical movements in different parts of the world began to identify that spiritual time was not tethered to calendars, but to states of consciousness. The moment of true prayer, of sincere repentance, of deep meditation, these were the new sacred times. And more than that, the human body became the new temple, with its own altars, chambers, and invisible gates. Breathing became the new chant, silence, the new offering, intention, the new key. In the meditative practices of Jewish, Christian, Sufi, and even Oriental traditions, it was observed that certain times of the day favored more intense spiritual experiences. It was not just a matter of habit, it was energetic synchronicity. At dawn, the mind is more receptive. At dusk, the heart is more sensitive. At midnight, the soul opens itself to the mystery. These times became portals, micro-temples of time, accessible to anyone, anywhere, who knew how to listen. With the advancement of human understanding, even science has begun to approach this ancestral wisdom. Chronobiology has revealed that the body has internal clocks, the circadian rhythms, that influence everything: sleep, mood, immunity, focus. This discovery seems to echo what the ancients already intuitively knew. Living out of sync with your own internal time is to become ill, both spiritually and physically. And conversely, when we reconnect with these cycles, something within us heals, organizes itself, and flourishes. The internal clock doesn't just keep chronological time, it captures the opportune time, the kairos. It's that rare moment when something aligns, intuition lights up, the truth is revealed. And these moments can't be programmed with mathematical precision. They emerge like lightning from the soul. Therefore, cultivating presence, silence, and attention has become the new way to adjust this invisible clock. A spirituality based not on dogmas but on deep listening. Modern mystics have begun to create methods to help people tune into this clock. Conscious breathing, mindfulness practices, rituals of reconnection with nature, silence retreats. All of this aims at a single goal: to remind the soul of its original rhythm. And when this happens, something extraordinary reveals itself. A peace that doesn't depend on the external world, an order that doesn't come from logic, but from attunement. The vibration of inner time also began to express itself artistically. Music based on frequencies, such as 432 Hz, began to emerge with the promise of aligning the body and mind to the universal pulse. Paintings, dances, poetry. Everything began to be seen as a form of expression of the sacred inner time. Each authentic creation is, at its core, an attempt to mark the eternal in the ephemeral, to make the invisible touch the visible. Meanwhile, spiritual movements and contemporary therapies have begun to rediscover traditional prayer times, not by dogma, but by intuition. Groups gather at sunrise to meditate. People wake up at midnight to pray. Others simply quiet themselves for a few minutes at dusk. These practices are not new. They are resurrections, reactivations of the ancient sacred clock, now experienced from within, with freedom and awareness. More than that, it began to be noticed that each person has their own spiritual clock. For some, dawn is the most sacred hour. For others, it is the time to serve others. There are those who feel the divine while walking, writing, or contemplating the sea. It's no longer about following a single universal time, but about discovering the unique vibration of your own soul. The temple no longer has walls. Time no longer has shackles. Synchronicity is now intimate, alive, present. And so, the clock of Jerusalem, which many believe to have been lost forever, is secretly reborn in every awakened human being. Not with hands or stones, but with perception, with practice, with silence. The temple is in the heart, the altar in the center of consciousness, and the sacred time pulses to the rhythm of love, truth, and presence. All that is necessary is to remember. For millennia, humanity believed that the sacred time had been lost in the fire of Jerusalem, that the secrets of spiritual synchrony had been buried under the rubble of the temple, forgotten in dusty manuscripts, guarded by hidden orders, or simply erased from history. But what if this narrative isn't the whole truth? What if the clock wasn't destroyed, nor hidden, just relegated to the invisible, waiting for eyes and hearts prepared to see it? The discrete societies that have emerged over the centuries, not necessarily secret, but silent, seem to know this. From the Essene mystics to the Sephardic Kabbalists, from the desert Christians to the Sufis, from the Eastern initiates to the contemporary seekers, they all speak with different words of a parallel time, of a secret rhythm that connects all beings, of an order that pulses beyond the hands of the clock. This order does not require belonging to an institution. It demands presence, purity of intention, and surrender. And what if, contrary to what we imagine, this clock didn't just mark the times of the temple rituals, but the cycles of the human soul? What if it's still functioning, measuring not minutes, but moments of truth, acts of compassion, instances of alignment between thought, word, and action? In that case, the sacred clock never ceased to exist. It simply changed its frequency, waiting for us to listen to it with our hearts again. Think about all the times you felt something special was happening. Those inexplicable synchronicities, the unexpected encounter, the accurate intuition, the sudden chill during a song, a prayer, or even a deep silence. Could these be signs of the ancient clock working discreetly? Could they be echoes from the inner temple, signaling that divine time continues to be active, even away from the stone altars? Today, with the advancement of neuroscience and quantum physics, we know that time is more than a straight line. It is relative, elastic, mental. Experiments show that the perception of time changes according to our emotional state, level of attention, and brain frequency. This confirms what mystics have always said. External time is just a reflection of internal time. And if this is true, the only thing that prevents us from accessing the sacred clock is forgetting how to listen to it. There are those who say that the clock of Jerusalem was not set in stone, but in human DNA. That the cycles of the temple were projections of the body and consciousness cycles. That the 7 days of creation are inscribed in our cells, in the phases of sleep, in the pulsations of the heart. And that each of us carries literally a spiritual mechanism capable of tuning in with the divine, as long as we know how to clear the noise and realign the hands of the soul. The apocalypse, often misinterpreted as a prophecy of destruction, can be read as a time code. It speaks of trumpets, cycles, cosmic clocks, and also of a new Jerusalem, a city where there is no longer a physical temple because the Lamb itself is the temple. This can be interpreted as the final stage of human consciousness, the moment when everyone awakens to the truth that we are the temple. That sacred time pulses within love, presence, spiritual clarity. And the societies that kept this secret throughout history never wanted to dominate it. They only sought to protect it from abuse. They knew that if the spiritual clock was used to manipulate rather than liberate, it would become a prison. That's why they preserved it in chants, symbols, myths, numbers, art. And that's why it's reappearing now. Not as an archaeological object, but as reactivated wisdom in the awakening souls. And if you're hearing this now, it may not be by chance. Perhaps this is your sign. Maybe at this very moment, the invisible hands of your inner clock are realigning, pointing to a new time. Not a time of the world, but a time of the soul, a calling, a return, a reminder that the temple lives within you, and the sacred time was never lost. Eternity has always been present. The clock has never stopped. The remaining question is, are you ready to listen to it again? And now, Mind Unfettered, it's your turn to make this invisible clock echo beyond the screen. I want to hear from you in the comments. When was the moment in your life when you felt time stood still, and something greater was guiding you? Or else, do you feel like you are living in the world's time, or in the soul's time? Share with us. Because when you write, you express, and when we read, we express together. And thus, the sacred clock begins to pulse again, like a collective beat of awakened consciousness. If this journey touched something deep within you, don't stop now. Because the next step could further transform your perception of spirituality, history, and purpose. Click now on the video appearing on your screen. The Hidden Code of Sinai, the lost teaching of Jesus that could change the world. There we will reveal forgotten teachings, hidden beneath the sands of time, that can realign your consciousness with a wisdom capable of healing and awakening.